might have noticed in the bulletin the title of the sermon. And if you didn't, I'll tell you what it is. It's called Raise Your Ebeneezer. Raise Your Ebeneezer. Whoever thought you'd have a sermon called Raise Your Ebeneezer, right? But in the song that we just sang, the second verse starts out, here I raise my Ebeneezer. Yeah, right. So what in the world is that guy talking about when he wrote that there? He's talking about in the song, he's talking about God, let me see your mercy, let me praise you for it. He talks about with my natural human desires to wander, let me recognize my need for you and your mercy and give my heart to you. And then he says, here I raise my Ebeneezer. Interestingly, this song is included in a Methodist hymnals, or has been for a long, long time. It was written back in, I think, 1758, so it goes back a ways as far as church songs. And this is a quote I found online. It says, one of the most obvious biblical allusions in this appears in stanza 2, where it says, here I raise mine Ebeneezer, hither by thy help I've come. It says the Hymnal Revision Committee for the 1989 United Methodist Hymnal. Okay, so they had this was in their hymnal for a long, long time, and every now and then, you update hymnals. Same thing, we change songs, we sing occasionally. And so in 1989, they decided, well, let's update some of the songs in our hymnal, change different songs, or in some cases, change some of the lyrics. It says they received several requests to alter this stanza by omitting the term Ebeneezer. But not finding a suitable substitute, the committee chose to maintain the original language. So here 300 years after the song's written, we're still singing about Ebeneezer. So what is Ebeneezer, or who is Ebeneezer? Anybody have any ideas? Who Ebeneezer, what Ebeneezer?
Said it was a stone. Yeah,
it's a stone. It's a stone. Yeah, it's not Ebenezer Scrooge. It's not out of A Christmas Carol. It's not that Ebeneezer. So don't think we're singing about him. But I want us to look at the story in the Bible. If you turn to 1 Samuel, this word Ebeneezer is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. It's all in the same story. It covers 2 or 3 different chapters. And we'll just look back at this story. Some of these Old Testament stories are pretty interesting. And this word is used in 1 Samuel 4, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1, and chapter 7, verse 12. And we'll get to all those. We won't read all those chapters, but we'll read those parts of them. In chapter 3 of 1 Samuel, Samuel, the author of the book, had, if you remember the story, he was a little boy. His mother couldn't have children, and then God blessed her with this child called Samuel, and she dedicated him to God's service. He went to live with Eli in the temple. Eli was the high priest at the time, and Samuel was just a little guy, and God called to him. And remember the story, he kept thinking it was Eli calling to him. He kept running into Eli's bedroom going, what do you want? And Eli go, I didn't say anything to you. And he'd go back and go to bed, and he'd hear this voice again. So Samuel was called by God to be a prophet. And this was in Israel before there were kings. This was before Saul, before King David, before any of those folks. They had come out of Egypt. They were in the promised land. And they were being ruled basically by judges and prophets that had part of the, were involved as well too. So here was Samuel. He was probably pretty young at this point. Doesn't give his age. And in 1 Samuel 4, that's where we'll pick up the story. It says, and Samuel's words came to all Israel. So Samuel was, a spokesman for God. That's the way prophets worked back in that day. And they would carry the word of God to the people, and then they would often record the words that they got, such as Samuel or Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all those prophets would do. So we come here to 1 Samuel 4, and would somebody read for us verses 1 through 4? Just whatever version you've got it in, we'll follow. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Thus the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped beside Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped in Aphek. And the Philistines drew up in battle array to meet Israel. When the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies." So the people went to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God.
All right, so that's the way the story starts. So we see Ebeneezer already, right? That was a town, it was a place originally, and we'll see how that ties in later. So the Israelites were over here at Ebeneezer, and the other Philistines were over at the other town. Now, had the Philistines and the Israelites ever met before in battle? This is a ways into their history. Remember when the Israelites first crossed over the Jordan and came into the land, and they had to fight various people? Remember the walls of Jericho falling down and all these Bible stories we heard about? Well, the Philistines were one of the groups that were in the land that Israel was supposed to get rid of. And the Philistines didn't like that idea at all about giving up their land to this group of people who were coming in from Egypt after being down there for 450 years. Like, who are you to come in here and take over our land? And so sure, they fought them, but Israel, if you look back in the earlier books of the Bible, Israel had beat them, and God had been on their side, and that's the way it had worked. And so they figured they'd go out and beat them again. They beat them before, why not? But it didn't work out that way. They went out and they got whooped, and 4,000 of them got killed. So not too good of an end. So they thought, well, that didn't work out very well. God must have not been with us. I'm just sort of putting thoughts in their mind. So let's go grab the ark. Now, what was the ark?
That's where God sat in between the angels.
Okay, so it says here about between the cherubim, which are angels. So the ark was, what was it structurally? What it looked like?
A box.
It was a box. Yeah. And anybody remember what was in the ark?
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments, tablets, manna, jar of manna, and Aaron's rod, right? Yeah, staff. Yeah, so all that was in the ark. Yeah, because it's a big box. Small staff, big box. So that was all in the ark. And so was that God? Was God in the ark? No. God wasn't in the ark, but I mean things that had to do with the history of Israel. It represented God, right?
But the mercy seat was in the middle of it, right? Between the cherubim?
Yeah, there was something mercy seat-wise, the lid of the ark and the cherubim. Not sure. I've seen pictures of it, but it gets drawn different ways. But yeah, so when there was a sanctuary, a tabernacle, and later a temple, that was in, remember, the Holy of Holies. And so it was that representation of being in God's presence. But it wasn't God. God didn't live there. God doesn't live in a box. He lives outside of that, of course. So, but the Israelites thought, well, if we go get the box, the ark, and bring it here, then that will bring God here, and then we'll be okay. So let's see how that worked. Let's see. Somebody read, if you would, verses 5 through 11. 5 through 11.
Well,
Okay, Ma.
when the Israelites saw the ark of the covenant of the Lord coming into the camp, their shouts of joy were so loud that it made the ground shake. "What's going on?" the Philistines asked. "What's all the shouting about in the Hebrew camp?" When they were told it was because the ark of the Lord had arrived, they panicked. "The gods have come into their camp," they cried. "This is a disaster. We have never had to face anything like this before. Who can save us from these mighty gods of Israel?" They are the same gods who destroyed the Egyptians with plagues when Israel was in the wilderness. Fight as you never have before, Philistines. If you don't, we will become the Hebrew slaves just as they have been ours. So the Philistines fought desperately, and Israel was defeated again. The slaughter was great. 30,000 Israelite men died that day. The survivors turned and fled to their tents. The ark of God was captured, and the 2 sons of Eli were killed.
Now that's not the way they're supposed to work. You go get the ark, you bring the ark in, and everything's better. Because now God's with you. Supposedly. But it didn't work out that way. They go get the ark, and they get beat worse than before. Now they lose 30,000 guys instead of 4,000 guys.
And God gets stolen.
And God gets stolen, yeah. Yeah. Interesting back there, the Philistines' view of the ark, wasn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Philistines, they knew the history of Israel. They knew they had gotten beaten before. They knew they came out of Egypt. They said they're the ones that did the plagues back in Egypt. I mean, the story had gotten around that part of the world. It wasn't just the Israelites were the only ones that knew about this God. But the Philistines were saying, these gods, because they worship multiple gods, they didn't realize that Israel just had a God. And sometimes you wonder if Israel realized they had just a God, because they seemed to be pretty weak in the way they obeyed God, worshiped God, and what they thought about even their own God. They thought often that their God was kind of like the gods of the other nations. They thought you could put him in a box and you could bring him over to a battle site, and then that would make everything okay. But that wasn't the kind of God that was their God. It wasn't a God you just put in a box and carried around. And he was just there to kind of do their bidding. And when they needed to win a battle, you bring him over there and you win a battle. So there the Philistines were maybe a little more scared of God than the Israelites were even understanding their God. And so they got beat. All right, we'll skip a little part of the story after that, but it talks about Eli's death. When he hears his sons have died and so forth, he dies. But let's come over to chapter 5, because this will continue the main part of the story. And somebody read verses 1 through 8, if you would. Chapter 5, 1 through 8.
I will.
All right.
Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebeneezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it before Dagon. Excuse me. When the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priests of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and his territories. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around.
All right, so more of the story there. This would almost be funny if it weren't so sad. I just picture this as, they bring the ark, which represents God. Here the Philistines have it now. It's not even their God, but they got this ark, and they think, well, we got something now because we've got this God of these Israelite nations, and this God's in this box. That's what they think, and so we brought the box inside our temple, which means our God, Dagon. Dagon's one of their gods, and apparently it was some kind of a stone structure that they had in a temple. So they bring the ark in, the box, and they set it somewhere in the temple. And what happens? The next morning they come in, and there's there's Dagon's like falling over, conk, and they're like, that's never happened before. Wonder what's going on here. So they get their ropes and hoist whatever it takes, and they prop Dagon back up, get him standing back up. And the next morning they come in, clunk, he's fallen over again. His arms and legs are broken off now. It's almost funny. It's like some little clay figure or something you do with the kids. But there's a point being made here that, okay, even though God didn't live in the box, symbolically, that's what was going on here. It was like, okay, who's God's in charge of what? Dagon couldn't even stay upright. He bowed down, as it were, on his face in front of the God of Israel. So that was going on. That's kind of a little funny part of the story, I think. So, of course, they get panicky, and they start getting these tumors. And we'll read a little bit later, maybe get a little more explanation about this, but they're afflicted with some kind of tumor, some kind of growths or swelling or something that's going on. Must have been painful, and we see later that it was lethal in some cases. Some people died from it. So you can see why they would panic, and they were saying, well, this God, this new God, this Israelite God, that his hand is heavy on us, and we don't want him hanging around here. He's causing too much trouble. So they said, let's move the ark over to Gath. Oh yeah, thanks a lot, right? This is another city of the Philistines. They had 5 main cities, and Ashdod was one of them, and Gath was another one. So let's see what happens when they move it to Gath. Somebody read, let's see, let me read this because I need to stop in the middle of a verse. Just a couple of verses here. It says, but after they had moved it, it'd be over to Gath, the Lord's hand was against that city, throwing it into a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron, 3rd city. It's not working here. It didn't work in the last city. It's not working in our city. Let's send it over to our dear friends in Ekron. And so it says, as the ark of God was entering Ekron, the people of Ekron said, sure, bring it on in here. We're glad to have it. No. He said, the people of Ekron say they have brought the ark of God of Israel around us to kill us and our people. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people. For death had filled the city with panic. God's hand was very heavy on it. So not a good part of the story there. It says those who did not die, so apparently some were even dying, were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven. So here we got this story that continues on. They finally figure out they don't want that ark thing hanging around their house or their temples or their towns anymore. So that we won't read chapter 6, but the story goes on in chapter 6 of how they return the ark to Israel. And they ask themselves, wait, we can't just send the ark back by itself because we stole it from them, and we kind of need to make it up to them. So what should we do? And their priest said, well, you need to include a guilt offering when you send it back. So what they did is they made 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats. Isn't this an interesting story? So whatever the tumors look like, they apparently made 5 golden things that looked like those tumors, and then 5 gold rats. That's what the Bible says. You can look it up in the Hebrew. It's rats. So it kind of got me wondering. So I looked up the bubonic plague, and I went, heard about that. The Black Death, those kind of things that were in Europe back in the Middle Ages. And those things were, you had swollen lymph nodes because what it was an infection that was caused by the bite of fleas, mostly from rats. And so the fleas would bite the people, and they would, they'd get infections, and they would swell up. Their lymph nodes would swell up, which would create, bulbous tumor kind of things. That had a picture of some, not from the Middle Ages, but from recent cases. And So I don't know if that was the tumors that they're talking about, that kind of swollen things like that, but something was causing a lot of pain and even death of these folks. So they put the ark on a cattle-drawn cart. Now, that didn't turn out to be good later. That's another story. But in 2 Samuel 6, you might remember a guy named Uzzah who didn't come out too good when the ark was put on a cattle-drawn cart, because the ark was supposed to be carried by the priest on their shoulders with some sticks run through some rings on the side of the ark. They weren't ever supposed to touch it, weren't supposed to open it, weren't supposed to have any physical contact with it at all. But Uzzah later in Israel's history did, and it didn't turn out well for him. But the Philistines didn't know any better. They weren't Israelites. They didn't know the rules of God. So they put it on a cattle-drawn cart, and the cattle were apparently homing cattle, because it said they headed back toward Israel, and they followed them down the road. The Philistines followed them at a distance behind. Again, it's kind of funny. They're like following along behind, and the cart would go and go over the hills and through the dales, and they're like, come on, keep going, keep going, keep going. And finally, the cart crossed the line, and it's like, whew, okay, good, it's back in their territory. And they all turned around and went back home. The Philistines did, like, got that thing out of here before it killed any more of us. So the cart ended up going back and ended up being at a town called Beth Shemesh, is where it stopped. And there was a little side light there in the story. 7 of the Israelites were killed because they looked into the ark. They always wanted to know what was in there, and they thought they'd look in and find out. Didn't turn out well for them. So the ark, again, it caused trouble there in Beth Shemesh, so the Israelites moved it to a town called Kiriath Jearim. All right, so let's pick up the story, last part of the story here in 1 Samuel 7. In verse 1 through 6. Someone read 1 through 6 for us. You have to pronounce a couple of names, but it's not too bad. Brave souls, come on, you can do it. Faye's thinking about it. Go ahead, Faye.
I can't see too good this morning. Then the man.
Yeah, I know. Kiriath Jearim. We'll help you with the words,
Okay.
with the names.
The K, R-J, what's that?
Yeah, Kiriath Jearim is
Okay.
best I got.
Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of
Abinadab.
Ebeneezer on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. So it was at
At that place.
At KJ.
KJ. Call it KJ. Yeah, call it KJ.
Okay. Mainly KJ, wow, a long time. It was there 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the
Ashtoreths.
Ashtor from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only. He will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the
Yeah.
okay, and serve the Lord only. How many verses you say?
Through verse 6.
And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, and drew the water and poured it out before the Lord. And they fasted that day and said, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. Wow. Okay.
So you did good with all those names and town names and stuff. So we see a change here now. The ark's there, and we see that the people, it says their hearts are beginning to change, and they're committing themselves to the Lord. They're not looking just at the box and the ark, but they're going, there's a God here that we need to be worshiping, not just a box. And Samuel recognized that, and he encouraged that, and they repented. The people did, and things were changing for them in their outlook.
Over 20 years?
Yeah, sat in that house 20 years because they didn't want to move it. I mean, the people, just 70 people had gotten killed in the other town. They finally found a spot for it. It wasn't causing any trouble. They left it alone at that point. And there wasn't a place to take it yet. The history is until Solomon built the temple and so forth, there wasn't a home any better for it. So someone, this will be the last little set of verses, 7 through 11. Someone read 7 through 11, chapter 7.
Time for the message.
Sure, you can read the Message Bible.
When the Philistines heard that Israel was meeting in Mizpah, the Philistine leaders went on the offensive. Sure, I can read. Israel got the report and became frightened. Philistines, on the move again. They pleaded with Samuel, "Pray with all your might and don't let up. Pray to God our God that he'll save us from the boot of the Philistines." Samuel took a young lamb, not yet weaned, and offered it whole as a whole burnt offering to God. He prayed fervently to God, interceding for Israel, and God answered. While Samuel was offering the sacrifice, the Philistines came within range to fight Israel. Just then God thundered, a huge thunderclap exploding among the Philistines. They panicked, mass confusion, and ran helter-skelter from Israel. Israel poured out of Mizpah and gave chase, killing Philistines right and left to a point just beyond Beth-car.
Okay. Hold just a second.
Okay.
All right, so see, things are changing because now the ark wasn't just a kind of a lucky rabbit's foot kind of thing. It was actually, they were seeing what the ark was. This was representing the real God of Israel, the God that had brought them out of Egypt, the God that had parted the Red Sea, the God that had done the plagues and killed the firstborn and had all the frogs and the darkness, the God that had brought them through 40 years in the wilderness and water out of a rock, etc., etc. They were now focused on, okay, this is God. This is who we should be worshiping and obeying, rather than let's just carry this wooden box around and we'll be protected. So they learned a lesson. They learned a very important lesson. It took a number of years, but this was now becoming a high point in the history of Israel. And so in verse 12, we see Ebeneezer mentioned for the third time. It says, "Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shin. He named it Ebeneezer, saying, 'Thus far the Lord has helped us.'" So this stone that he set up, called Ebeneezer, means stone of help. That's what Ebeneezer means in the original language. And thus far as the Lord helped us, to me, that's he's looking back, he's remembering how the Lord has helped him before and how he's helped him now and how he helped him in this particular battle. And so it's all a matter of remembrance. It's all a matter of looking back and remembering what God had done in the past. Why does he name it Ebeneezer? Why is that important? Why is that even in the Bible? Why is that in that guy's song of all weird things that we were singing, if it's not important? And I think one reason that's important, and the lesson we can get out of this, is that what God has done before, he can do again. What God has done before, he can do again. Now that's easy to see in the history of Israel, because it's written in the Bible, and we have this happened and then that happened, and when they obeyed, good things happened. When they disobeyed, they got defeated, they got killed. And so we see this history of God. But what about your life and my life? What about not the history of Israel, but you and me? Are there Ebenezers in our life? Are there stones of remembrance, stones of memorial? Are there times and memories in our life where we need to have something where it allows us to look back at how God has worked in the past? Because there's times where we get in some pretty dark times in our current life, where we're sick, or we're out of money, or someone we love is going through a pain. Someone's been in a car wreck. Someone's died. All kinds of things that go on in our lives. And I think we can, like the Israelites, we can focus on the wrong things, or don't focus on God at all sometimes, because we get overwhelmed with sadness, or with fear, or with a doubt, lack of faith, with whatever emotion we may be going through right then, because the event, the thing that's happening to us right now, is is what's consuming us. It's what's got our mind. It's the only thing we can think about because it's hurtful or it's painful. And I think we need to have these Ebenezers in our life where we can stop and we can say, but wait a minute. What has God done before? And if he's done it before, he can do it again. And it might not even be the exact same thing that he's done before, but what kind of power has he shown before? What kind of compassion has he shown in my life before? What kind of action has he taken? How has he helped me mentally, psychologically, spiritually through things before? And here I am in this position today. I'm battling the Philistines. They're out there. I hear they're coming to get me. Or I think they've already gotten me maybe. And I need a stone. I need a rock. I need something that I can look at, cling to, and go, wait a minute. God's done this in my life before. He's delivered me before. He's helped me before. And he can do it again. I want us to take just a few minutes here. I want to ask you guys, each of you, or anybody, not each of us, don't have time for each person, but can you think back at a time in your life? And just, if you can think of a specific story, a specific instance, don't make it a real long tale, but certainly, tell us has there been something where you can look back and say, I know that God was there at that point. I know he saw me through that, and then something you could share with us.
Okay.
George, you got something?
I gotta do.
We'll keep it short, but go ahead. Tell us what you got.
I'm gonna take a look forward. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I know we got lunch. We can do that in the middle here, but yeah. Yeah.
I'm in parole
Yes, sir.
in PPT, June, July, something like that. So they sent me to a unit to have a real class. I was in the class, approximately a month and a half. I got real sick.
Mm-hmm.
I was wide awake. I couldn't eat. So I waited about a month before they sent me to the hospital. And you want me to go through these stages with the cancer that I had? Well, I got the third stage, and they diagnosed I had cancer, a tumor in my stomach. And I became very depressed, very, a lot of anxiety, very sad.
Mhm.
And I prayed very hard that God would give me a second chance. Because I thought I hadn't done enough for him. Okay? And he placed a hand on those doctors. They gave me 8 months of chemo and they cured.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you, he had to have a hand in that because, this was a real serious matter. I couldn't, for 90 days, I couldn't eat nothing, and then just life on the back, feet. So yes, he had a hand in that work. And give me a chance to smile, and I've helped several people since then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Took some people that in home. Here's a man making, $750 a month. You take these poor people into his house, he feeds them, he pays all the bills, he gives them everything to go find work, to find jobs and everything. Now they're paying him back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something God has.
A good thing. So that's one of those Ebenezers that you can look back at, a stone, a memorial. Somebody else share something. Yeah, Lydia.
When my dad was in the hospital, he was in the hospital for 19 days before he found out that he was diabetic. He was in a diabetic coma.
Mm-hmm.
We had friends in Indiana, Ohio, Florida, and they had the whole church in the country, different people praying. And my mom always said it just felt like God was hugging us, helping us through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So people say they can feel that when they know that people are praying for them. Yeah.
Well, mine is kind of like hers when Hank was in the hospital. I could feel the prayers. And of course, all my kids reunited. I was never alone in the hospital. There was always one or the other of them there, which was good. But still, you feel alone, although you know you're not. And I think Marie and Jesse both can attribute to the same thing. It's just, you just know. And you wonder, how am I gonna do this without your husband or your wife or whatever? But God sees you through it, one way or the other.
Well, I was wearing contacts for many years, and my contact fell in the carpet grass.
Oh, my. Mhm.
What chances are you gonna find your contact in a carpet grass? It was under a little piece of sand, halfway covered with sand.
Mhm.
I tell you, that's pretty good. God
Mhm.
showed me where it was.
Mhm.
You're not gonna find it in carpet grass.
Mhm. I bet there's lots of stories we could say where people say, you know, something happened like that, even just the simple everyday things of life. Can't find my car keys, just, you know, don't know where I'm going, can't find this address. I've heard people say, well, I just prayed, God, you gotta help me find this address. It could be something like you're trying to go to a wedding reception or something, and you're just trying to find a place, and you find a place that
And
you
there was
weren't
a-
finding, you
There
know.
was a
just-
spot on some clothes. I was doing some alterations, in Carson City. There was a spot on this person's clothes, like
Mhm.
oil or something. It disappeared.
It disappeared.
So
huh?
it was not there.
Mhm.
And it's not gonna disappear. God did that.
Any other stories, any other stones, memorial you can think of? Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, the one particular instance I'm thinking of, I just missed a huge wreck by seconds.
Mhm.
And something, God, kept me at home just a little bit longer that day than normal. Yeah, I was late to work, but I wouldn't have made it at all if I had gone when I was supposed to leave the house.
Mhm.
And that happens a lot of times, different places, different ways.
Yeah.
You get delayed for some reason, and you shouldn't have left when you really needed to.
You hear that? That's good. Yeah.
My brother over in Seguin, it's not very long, but he was working in his garage. He had this particular, he was grinding something. He was wearing contacts too, but he said that the grinder, something splintered off, hit him in the eye.
Ouch.
It ruined his contact, but he wasn't blind in that, you know, or impaired in the eye the rest of his
Mhm.
life, which was incredible. It
Mhm.
ruined the contact, but not his eye. That was incredible.
Think about the journey of this church, being amazing, kind of a transformation. I look at that, and I'm like, if God can do something like that, He can do a lot of things, and that kind of Ebeneezer, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah. That's a memorial. Yeah. Yeah.
I got a bunch of them.
I know. You just hang on, we'll wait. No, I think we all do. You know, but people are just shy. I remember, and I may have told you this before. It's not the only thing that happened in my life, but it's kind of one of the more dramatic ones. Was in college and was out on my bicycle one morning heading out to let the chickens out of their coops. That was one of my jobs I did, and this kid on campus had a motorcycle and he delivered newspapers. And it was dark. It was still real early in the morning. And he came around a curve, and I came around a curve at the same time. And he was on my side of the road, and he just ran into me. I'm on a little bicycle, and he's on a motorcycle. You know, so he just like plows into me, and off we go off the side of the road, and skidding through on the asphalt and out into the grass. And when we get in, we're both okay. He would be, of course. He had a lot of metal protecting him. I didn't have, my bicycle was just like a pretzel. I mean, obviously it didn't roll anymore. The wheel was like this, and the handlebars were like that, and everything was weird. And it was winter. I remember I had on a leather jacket, real nice leather jacket that Sue's family had bought me, I think, and leather gloves, and I had a leather hat on. Actually, it was built. It was leather. It wasn't cloth. And I hit the road. I mean, when the motorcycle hit me, I went off over the handlebars. And the bike was just taken away from me, and I just went all over the road and off onto the ground. Got up, wasn't sore, never was sore, there wasn't a scratch, even though I hit the asphalt and skidded and rolled and all kinds of stuff. Couldn't find a mark, couldn't find a little, you know, leather will leave marks, it'll protect you, but it'll be scratched up. Never found a scratch anywhere in anything.
And you don't remember landing or anything?
I don't remember landing. I remember seeing the motorcycle. I remember feeling that it hit, and then the next thing I got, I was just like getting up, and he was getting up, and that was it. So I didn't have the trauma of the wreck and knowing what went on. But
You know, something similar to that, like that happened to me a few years ago. and my sister was living in Boston before she passed. And I would get out in that area the weekend and visit with her. And this particular time, it started raining on the way back. And I think I told you all this before. I was coming out Highway 80, right here on Eastern Highway 80, at the lights. And when the light, I was driving a little stainless steel Beard Skyhawk. That's when my husband hit me and put me in another little bitty car. I went to take off. I must hit a slick spot or something. But that car airborne. I tore down every sign on that side of the street. Every last one of them. I tore that car up so bad, I knocked the oil pan out. I had all 4 of my children with me. They were little children.
Oh my.
And nobody had a scratch on. And when the cops came, I was still standing holding my baby, and I was nursing my baby. And he said, "Who had the wreck?" I said, "I did." And I never was sore, you know. And my children just as happy. Little girl slept through the whole thing. The car was just towed up. But that little part where she was laying asleep, she never woke up.
That's what car seats.
Yeah, that was before car seats, before seatbelts. Yeah. Yeah, the things we made it through back in the day. Well, those are all stories that I think those are great, and I know there's more. There's hundreds. As George is saying, we could all come up with more and more and more.
Nobody
And,
like me.
Yeah. Well, and that's good, and God does that. God is present, and God does things, and sometimes we have to think about it. Sometimes we have to, and we don't want to you're like, well, are we making stuff up? Well, I think I'd rather give God credit. Maybe we're a little too much than to steal credit from Him where it's true. So.
That's how I work. That's how I witness to people. I tell them about the good things that's done God in my life. And I don't say, well, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. And I don't try to scare them.
Just right.
I try to give them encouragement.
You just tell them what He did in your life, right? Yeah.
People get saved with my encouragement. Stay saved a lot longer. In other words, they follow Christ longer than the ones that just get back scared into it. They don't go back to the old habits. They stay.
Yeah. There's something to be said with encouragement, with seeing what this does. Israel needed to look back and see the positive. They needed to see where God was active in their life, not where He wasn't. They need to remember back. And and I'll just close by going, if you remember the stories in the Bible, if you read through, especially the Old Testament, and remember even in the New Testament where Paul's given some of his sermons in Acts, how many times do they refer back to, at the faith of Abraham and how God worked with Abraham and what He did for him, and Jacob and all the stuff about coming out of Egypt and the plagues. You can read in Psalms over and over again where they just recount that history. The book of Isaiah, they recount what God has done, what God has done, what God has done. And the whole Bible, to me, is an Ebeneezer. You can open up the Bible just about anywhere, and you're going to see stories of God doing His thing, protecting, being compassionate, loving, sometimes punishing, yes, but God active, God involved, God's there, He's with us. So that's what this little word, this little Ebeneezer in the Bible, when they set up that pile of stone, or that stone, and they named it Ebeneezer, because the people, and the intent was that people would come by that stone for decades and centuries later. I don't know how long it stood there. We don't know where it is today, but it's been a long time since then. But that as your children would go by and the families would go by, and people would say, oh yeah, that reminds us of what God did in this instance with these people. And if someone was in a problem, in a situation like we all get, where we're wondering, where is God? Can He help me with this? How is He going to help me? I don't think I feel Him helping me. I don't think I see it. Well, He's done it before, and He can do it again. And that is pretty good news. That's the gospel. God's done it before, and He can do it again. So raise your Ebeneezer in those times of doubt and darkness, pain, suffering, and share that Ebeneezer, as George is saying, with other people. Let just your simple witness be an encouragement to other people as well. So that's part of the gospel. What God has done before, he'll do it again. And that's good news.